Welcome to the Umbrella Hour. This is Dr. On, and Zander Keig is with me today. We have an important guest to introduce to you. And Zander, since you know this guest and have for years, why don't you introduce our guest?
Thank you, On. Yes, I'm really excited today. We have Cassandra Williamson. We might intermittently refer to her as Cassie, but Cassandra is somebody that I met, about a year ago now. And we've just had a lot of interaction with each other over the last year. And I just thought the audience would be really interested in hearing not only Cassie's story, but some of the work that Cassie's doing. I think it's really important work, and you'll understand a little bit more why that is as we get into the show.
Thank you, Zander. I appreciate that. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
It has been a year, hasn't it? It's been about a year. Probably longer than that. I don't know.
It's true. It has been over a year now, probably about a year and a half.
Yeah, probably has. I remember running into some conversations you and I had, and all I've had to do around, obviously, the transgender veterans and the care that we get at the VA and Veterans Administration and stuff like that. And it was really exciting to me to run into you. And I am so glad that I did. And a lot of our interaction had to do with previous organization that I worked for. And I'll mention the name. It's Transgender American Veterans Association, a wonderful organization, I believe, completely, wholly in the vision and mission of TAVA, that was called. And just a phenomenal organization that's been around since 2003, founded by two wonderful people, Angela Brightfeather and Monica Helms, both of whom remain friends of mine to this day, even though I've stepped away from TAVA now and moved into a new organization. To tell you the truth about this, I had no intention of starting anything new after I left TAVA until I started getting phone calls from all around the country, from within the VA, the Veterans Administration. They're saying, "So what are you going to do next? Come on, we got to do something else." But I just left that one.
So before we get into that organization, let's hear a little bit more about who is Cassie. So you mentioned you're a veteran. For the audience, for the listeners, I'm also a veteran. I served in the US Coast Guard. And also, I currently serve on the board of directors for the Transgender American Veterans Association, or TAVA, as you mentioned. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what led you into the military and which branch or branches, I believe you were more than one branch, did you serve in, and in what roles, what capacities, and how long did you serve? Are you retired, that kind of thing? Let's just hear a little bit more about that background.
Well, first thing is you need to know that I grew up in the hills of eastern Kentucky. If you can't tell by the accent, I live in Alabama, so that kind of complicates things even worse. You can't separate them from each other now. But so I did grow up in eastern Kentucky, right along the West Virginia border. That makes it even worse, right?
I can hear it in your voice.
Well, I can tell you that, my speech pathologist figured that out too. They told me that. I'll get to that in a minute. That's another squirrel. You know, most people say that you got ADHD. Well, no, I've got ADOS. You know what OS stands for on that one? It says AD. Oh, there's a squirrel.
I think I have that same diagnosis.
ADOS. There's a squirrel. Oh, let's go that way. So anyway, I grew up in eastern Kentucky, and very good family, strong family. I mean, no problem, no issues, no challenges. Dad was a hard worker. Mom was a hard worker. They all lived and worked there in that area. And Dad had been in the Navy. He was a CB in the Navy back in the 1950s. And I always thought that was pretty impressive, but also I was very fascinated with learning and education, because I was in college while I was in high school, and I was doing all this stuff all simultaneously. And basically I was just a big nerd, and I did really well with all that. And then I decided I needed an education, and I also wanted to kind of tamp down or destroy the person I knew that I was. I wanted to get rid of this person you see now, this person that I am as a woman. I wanted to get rid of all that, and I couldn't carry that burden. I had to do something to do something about that. So in my senior year in high school, it was in November of that year, I had already passed the ASVAB testing of the entrance exams for the military, the US military, and all that. And I had scored high enough where they said, like, you could do whatever you want. I think they tell everybody that, though, just to get them in. That's my my impression of that one. But they said, yeah, come on down. So I walked in. I was thinking I'd join the Marine Corps because that would do it. That'd prove to my dad that I was this real male son of his. That was the whole idea. I mean, I was going to join the Corps and possibly tour the world and get a little education along the way and all that kind of stuff. Well, I walked in a recruiter's office, and it was upstairs in an old post office building in a town called Williamson, West Virginia. Yeah, that's my last name. That's my family's from there. That's where we're there. Okay. So I tell people that the town was named for my kids and grandkids, but that's not true, just so you know that. So I walked into the recruiter's office and I'm thinking, I'm going to Corps. So I saw the Marine Corps was on the right-hand side down this passageway. Sorry about the word passageway. That's an old habit from the Navy. So the Marine Corps recruiter's office, and this guy stood up from behind his desk. I'm going to tell you, he stood up. I don't think he stopped going up. He's up big and broad, and I think I'll go join the Navy. So I went down and they said, you can do what you want. I've heard this before. So anyway, so they started rattling off a bunch of things that I could do and all that. And they came across one called cryptologic technical, CTT. And I said, so tell me a little bit about that job. And they said, well, we only know the name. We can't tell you much about it. It's classified. And I said, what about job opportunities after you get out of the military? That's classified too. And I said, okay, sign me up for that one. So I went into the Navy, enlisted in boot camp. They quickly put me up from E1 to E3 because I became the education petty officer right off the bat. I mean, after I passed out, that is, once in line for chow. They said, you want to do something else? And I said, yeah. And they said, you can do education petty officer if you want. And I said, okay. So I did that. But anyway, after boot camp, they put me up to E3 and then advanced really fast through all the field and the CT stuff, the cryptologic tech stuff. And I mean, really fast. And so I ended up going out on tour on 3 sub tours.
Cassandra, when you say sub tours, you were on submarines? You were a submariner?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there's 2 branches of the Navy. It's the submarine force and the rest of them. That's just the way it is, okay? You can ask Monica Helms that. She'll tell you that. By the way, I mentioned Monica earlier. She's the one of the co-founders of TAVA, the organization that Zander and I were in, and also the designer of the Trans Pride flag. I want to get that out there because Monica's awesome.
Oh, yeah, I actually wrote that down to mention it. So for people who don't know, the original trans flag, the pink, blue, and white flag, is on display at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And the rainbow flag, Gilbert Baker, I believe an Army veteran, designed the rainbow flag. So wow. Veterans are all in on the flags with our communities.
Of course we have flags. I mean, especially if you're in the Navy. I mean, flags are everywhere, except on a submarine now, just so you know. Hard to fly a flag on a submarine. So anyway, I did that. I did 3 tours, all classified. So then I still wanted that education part, and I needed that badly. That's just who I am, the educational part of it. So somebody talked me into applying to the Naval Academy. And so I did through a senator in Kentucky and a senator in West Virginia and the Secretary of Defense. So I applied through all 3 of those to get into the Naval Academy, and all 3 of them accepted. So I had 3 appointments.
That's remarkable.
I know. And it's like, wow. Yeah. Anyway, I did that. And first thing I had to do was go to prep school in Newport, Rhode Island. So I didn't have the athletic background. So they sent me up there. And so I became the school's first term battalion commander, all this stuff, and went to Annapolis, got my degree in applied sciences, statistical math, operations analysis is what it was called back then more than anything. But yeah, I went there in the last century, last century, really far back there. So the funniest thing is, though, once we had service selection week come up, I'm thinking I could just go in the Navy and do whatever I want to do. But I still had that itching thing in my head that said, you're going to have to prove to your dad that you're the real male son of his. I got a commission in the Marine Corps.
Oh, you went on the green side.
I went to the green side. And all that was designed just to either destroy who I am and show my dad that I was this real male son of his. And there are pictures of me and Dad. I'm in Marine Corps uniform and Dad's sitting beside me. And so I got out of the academy, and then they wanted to send me through air traffic control school. I didn't go that route. I ended up just being just a flunky on the ground. So I went that route. I did my time. I loved it. I loved the Corps. I loved the Navy. Very much proud of all of that. I'm very happy about it. I did get married right out of the academy to a young person from Eastern Kentucky. If you know about family trees from Eastern Kentucky, there are no family trees in Eastern Kentucky. It's more like totem poles. Everybody's related to some extent. So after Patty and I got married, we made sure we had all of our family and kids out of Eastern Kentucky. We did not want that. For them. After the Marine Corps, I went into construction, again, trying to prove everything to my dad. That's what Dad did. I did that. I did it for 35 years, trying to prove it. That's what I retired from. I didn't really retire. I didn't retire from the military. I spent 9.5 years all total in the military. Good times. 2 of my children were born while I was in the military. And so all my kids were born in different states. Patty and I had a good time, a good marriage, a good life, but we did get divorced after 15 years. That was in 2000, but I was still in construction. I had all kinds of businesses. So construction wasn't the only thing. I put up metal buildings, and I can't imagine myself doing that in a miniskirt today, but now, it can be done.
Why not?
Why not? While I was in construction, I also had a couple other businesses going on at the same time. I had a little newspaper I ran down in Texas, and had a retail store I had down in Texas. I was commercial real estate appraiser, licensing, had a temporary services agency or business that provided employees to the mining industry in Kentucky and West Virginia. And
wow.
Yeah,
Zander, you were very, very busy, and it sounds like involved in just an interesting cross-section of industries, which doesn't surprise me because you have such a high intellect, right? And people with strong or high intellect get pretty bored with things that are consistent and don't really change. A couple of questions I have for you is, when you finished high school, did you also at that time have the AA degree, the associate's degree from?
I did not.
You did not. So you just taking courses, because I was wondering if that was helpful in your quick advancement. No. What years were you serving in the military? What were the actual calendar years?
77 till 86, sometime in 86.
Okay. Yeah. I joined in 1986. So both of us served pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
That's right.
Right, which was for people who don't know, we're talking about United States military. We're talking about in 1993, our president, Bill Clinton, a Democrat, gave us the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Don't Pursue policy for the Department of Defense. Prior to that, and I know it happened to me, I wonder if it happened to you, recruiters used to ask before you enlisted, are you now or have you ever been a homosexual? And I was asked that by the recruiter. My recruiter, when he asked me that, I just sort of sat there and stared at him. And he said to me, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And I said, "No, sir." And then, of course, he said, "Don't sir me. I work for a living," right? The typical response. And I said, "No, I don't have a girlfriend." He said, "Okay, sign here." And so I felt like I wasn't committing fraud, right? Because it would be a federal offense, a fraud offense, to be joined the military. So when I talk to people about the eras, it's not just the war eras. It's not just Korea and Vietnam and Gulf War and all. It's also pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, right? Which was like 93 to I think 2011 or 12. And then post Don't Ask, Don't Tell, so the being in this military as a member of the gay community, lesbian community, bisexual, trans community, as the language was back then, it was a very different place, a different time, a different understanding about things. And I know that at the time, as a very out lesbian serving in the Coast Guard, I kept my head down, so to speak, in order to put the mission first, because I believed in the mission was primary. Anything personal was secondary, maybe even tertiary, because, there were other issues like my family to think about. But I know that when I worked for the Navy on the transgender care team, I had 300 patients on my caseload, and there were a small number of them that put their personal identification as primary, and most of them got forced out through inability to adjust, right, to military culture, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering, were there any issues for you when you were serving between 77 and 86? You're in the military, right, as a man, right? Let's just, so to speak, right, in that kind of way of talking. You didn't transition until you're well years out of the military. And so did you have any internal sort of were you struggling with gender identity when you were in the military? Did you ever talk to anybody, a chaplain or somebody you were serving with, a colleague?
Well, back up to high school, there was a high school friend, a girlfriend that I had. She knew. I think she had the same kind of struggles, but it wasn't that she was lesbian and her dad was a Southern Baptist preacher. So she ended up committing suicide in 78. Yeah, those struggles have been going on with me for a long time. But like you said a minute ago about telling the military all this kind of stuff, well, I didn't have to worry about it at all, because whenever I signed up to go into the CT field, you know what happens when you do that, the cryptologic field? Very first thing they do is they take the next 6 months and investigate every detail about your life. Talking to the postmaster, talking to every friend in your community, because I heard from all of them. Oh, look, somebody came and asked questions about you. Woo. But see, I'd hidden myself from everybody. I'd really learned. I knew that. Back in the hills, no, you don't really do that. So I hid, but it became traumatic. The internal struggle was really, really, really bad.
When did the trauma piece of it all happen?
The trauma piece of it started when I joined the military. Really did. And whenever I went to the prep school up in Rhode Island, the Naval Academy prep school, after getting my appointment and all that kind of stuff there, I started drinking. And I just drank and I became totally inebriated. I think I stayed inebriated the whole time I was in the military after that, because I was still struggling with everything like it. So what happened was I told people I thought I was stopping to drink. I would drink so much I'd pass out. People would have to drag me back in past guards and everything like that. But I thought for sure that I would stop for a couple of years. And that's what I told people. But whenever I've asked my friends about it, because I've checked that I had back then, they said, nah, we found you were always drinking. You even had a bottle of hard liquor in your room hidden in the wall. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, I don't remember that. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you another story. The trauma was pretty severe, and it lasted for decades after that, even really. And so went back to my 35th reunion from the Naval Academy in 2018. Went back for that. And people kept telling me, they said, Overturf's here. Somebody by the name of Overturf is here. I'm thinking, okay, who's that? Well, we met, all of us, my company, 11 or 12 of us met at the local place we all hung out at. And they had to tell me that because I couldn't remember how to get around the town, much less the campus. I couldn't remember it. Didn't remember it. And they said, so we got Overturf's coming. And I'm going, really? Okay. I didn't know who that was. So he steps up in front of me, and he's an Air Force officer, a lieutenant colonel at the time. And, hi, Cassandra, how you doing? They all knew my name. There's a story. There's a squirrel behind that one. He said, remember me? No. Turns out he and I roomed together for 6 months. I didn't remember. There's no way I would have. He couldn't have proven it to me anyway, except he said one thing. So he gave me a book of quotes that I've used to this day. And I said, really? What was that? And he goes, it was a book of quotes by Isaac Asimov from the Foundation trilogy. And I'm going, that would have been me. But anyway, I don't remember. I blanked everything out completely.
It sounds to me like that could be like one that's dangerous, but also I could see it as a form of a protective factor, right? Because I know that when I was in the service, I was also a pretty heavy drinker and was referred over actually to the drug and alcohol treatment program, and they put me on Anabuse. I was under the age of 21, but we could drink on base under the age of 21, and so they put me on this medication that would not make me vomit if I drank alcohol. So I did stop drinking for 10 or 11 years. Now I can have a drink here and there and it's not a problem, but I did develop quite a heavy drinking problem. And because part of me was hiding, right? But at the time I was hiding as a lesbian. I didn't really have a consciousness of being trans, or none of that was in my consciousness at the time, actually. I was 20 years old, but I was hiding so that I wouldn't get kicked out. Because it was don't ask, don't tell. It was before that, of course, right? So they could throw me out. They even threw people out during don't ask, don't tell. A lot of people don't know about that, but they couldn't ask you. But if they discovered you were gay or lesbian or bi, they could throw you out. So a lot of people aren't familiar with that. But there was a sense in which I didn't have any guilt or shame. It wasn't that. It was more that I felt very isolated.
We're going to take our first break. We'll be back after this commercial.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
We're back from our commercial break. We're talking about coming out in the military, in the Navy. Let's pick up where Zander left off.
Right, because it was unclear to me, who can I disclose to? Who can I come out to? And so it was always having to be very protective. And in your case, it's so interesting because you've got your personal secret and you're also in a specialized field, which is top secret. right? That's why they're talking to the postmaster and your neighbors, right? It's top secret, and your missions are top secret. That just sounds like a really difficult situation to be in, where you can't talk to people about what you do and who you are. And if you think about it, like, that's just what we do. We talk to our spouses, our partners, about what we do. We talk to the people in our life about who we are and what we do. You had all these secrets.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I remember the first tour out on the submarine. I was thankful, but also kind of reticent about it. But they didn't have a room for me to sleep in because we were additional crew. So they gave me a 2-inch foam mat and told me to sleep in the torpedo room. So that's where I slept for the 3 months we were under the water in the torpedo room. But yeah, that's how I could use that as a hiding place. You'd work 12 on, 12 off. You can go there, hide, and crawl up on top of the torpedoes, and nobody would find me. It was just a place to be.
What you're saying is that people weren't just rushing to hang out in torpedo spaces?
No, they were not. That's right. They were not doing that. Because every few seconds or every couple of minutes, I guess, a few minutes or so, there'd be this whoosh, air release pressure. So there's no way to actually communicate very much. Unless, of course, you were running deep and running silent, in which case you could hear a pin drop then. But there were coping mechanisms I used, and I hid behind the alcohol. And it took a long time after the service to actually get rid of all of that, to actually get to realize what was causing it was the fact that I was hiding everything so deeply and needed to hide it, protect myself. Patty and I got divorced in 2000, and we're good friends, by the way. We're good friends. We've been in business together since then. We have 4 children and 8 grandchildren together. And so, yeah, we're good friends. As a matter of fact, she and my daughters are the ones I turn to for advice on men.
You've got them built in there, a little panel.
Right, you got a whole panel to go to. That's right. My daughters, they call me Dad or whatever, or Cassandra. Dad, that guy's probably not one you want to go out with. I remember these conversations. I was on the other side of that.
Right, that's right. As the father, right, of girls.
That's right.
Being very protective. You know, you've mentioned a couple of times that it took you decades to get through the trauma. We don't need to talk about the trauma, but what I'd love to hear is, what was it that got you through it? What services did you seek out? Was the VA integral to that or not?
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, the reason I mentioned that Patty and I were divorced in 2000 was that I was seeing this girl in 2002, and I walked into her bathroom, and on the shelf was this box of little tube of Premarin, the conjugated estrogen. And on the back of it, it has a warning label, and it says, men should avoid contact with this because it can cause breast development. That's when I think it was like lightning hit, and I hit the floor. What? I'd been denying all this for so long and hiding from it all for so long, and worked at a church, an evangelical, charismatic Pentecostal church in Texas for 6.5 years, trying to get rid of all of this. Even while I had my construction businesses going on and everything else happening, you could do it. You could be yourself. Really? So from 2002 until 2009, I read voraciously. I read everything I could get my hands on. I had to do with anything to do with the science and the medical side of things and the biology of it and everything. I found anything I could get my hands on, but no one knew. I kept that hidden completely. So in 2009, I started on my own hormone regimen because I knew what it was required. And so I started on my own. I didn't get a prescription from anybody. Don't anyone do this. Don't do this. Don't do it. Go to a doctor, make sure you get checked with a doctor, get your blood levels checked and all that type of thing. But I was so scared of telling people I didn't know how to do it. I could not fathom letting anyone know. So I ordered stuff, started taking the right hormones. I also ordered a lot by bulk, these herbs that have a lot of phytoestrogenic content, soy, wild yam, fenugreek, you name it. There's a bunch of them that are really high in phytoestrogen compounds that mimic estrogen. Chemically, they're like that.
Phytoestrogens, these are estrogens that occur naturally in plants.
That's right. Thank you. So yeah, I was ordering that stuff by bulk and taking it and doing all this kind of stuff. And I did that from 2009 all the way up into 2015. And intermittently in there were 3 events that put me in the hospital. Couple of times they thought they were going to lose me on one. The next time the doctor asked me if I was on steroids, I had lung problems and all this stuff, and they had to do a lung biopsy on me, go through the side. This was like in 2014. And by that time, breast development had started pretty dramatically, very dramatically, naturally occurring. And I was scared to death to let this doctor go in and check to see what's going on in my lungs. But I did. When he came back into this room after I'm back in there, he's checking everything out. And that's when he asked the question. He said, "So you're on steroids?" And Patty's on the windowsill, my ex-wife, best friend in the world. And I looked at her and I looked at him and I go, "No." But I was on estrogen, steroidal compounds of estrogen and stuff like that. Anyway, I was taking it all along. Had been for a number of years at that point.
Well, it's an interesting question because for men who take steroids, right, large doses of testosterone, it converts in your body into estradiol, and then you can get breast development because of excess testosterone, because estradiol or estrogens or Premarin, those aren't steroids, right? Yeah. I don't think they're called steroids. On would know, On is a nurse. If our estrogens, estradiols, Premarins, progesterone, are those called steroids?
All hormones are sex steroids.
Large doses of testosterone, and it was converting in your body. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what he thought, no doubt about it. But so I told him no. But I also warned my son after I went public in 2016. I warned my son because he's weightlifting and stuff like that. And I knew that he had massive quantities of these chemicals or herbs, basically. A lot of soy in them. And they use soy for that reason. Well, soy, if you take it in enough quantities, causes breast development. And that's what they're looking for in weightlifting, is to get that breast development that makes it look right. But when you lose your muscle mass, those breasts aren't going anywhere. So I warned my son about that. I said, slow down on the soy, son. Find something else if you don't want to look like me. So I came out in 2016. Actually, it was like in January of 2016. And there's a whole story behind that too. And I was actually in Missouri at the time. I was there to help my son get out of the Air Force. He spent 9.5 years in the Air Force. Patty and I went there and to help him get out. We ended up getting a place, ended up buying 3 restaurants. Back to that stuff of doing over accomplishment and getting bored. So we bought 3 different restaurants, and she owned one. I was a silent partner in that, and I owned the other 2, and still doing everything else that we were doing. We had a cleaning business in town, commercial business. I was actually on the city council as a member of the Historic Preservation Commission. 1 month I'm coming in there in the stuffy male suit and attire, just grab. Next month, I'm in there in a mini skirt giving a report as the vice chairperson for the Historic Preservation Commission. And I did tell them, I said, no, I know there's a lot of irony in what I'm doing here. I'm defending the facades of our historical structures in town, but they just laughed at that one. I was also on the member relations committee for the local chamber of commerce. And this was during the 2016 elections. Obviously, Trump was running. Everybody else was running at the time. And so we had this. The local Republican Party wanted to come in and open up an office, and I knew these people. They'd been in my restaurants. Okay, so we had a piece of paperwork come across my desk at the chamber one day, and it was welcome for a grand opening for the Johnson County Republican Party, Missouri, and Whiteman Air Force Base is near there. But anyway, it's about 10 miles. So I said, I want to do that one. I want to go out and welcome them. They said, yeah, can we be a fly on the wall for that? So I go out there, I walk in that day, and obviously back then I was pushing all the boundaries, like our friend out in California, in my mini skirt, and I mean, just showing it off, but I walk in there and I say, hey, Violet, she was the co-chairperson Republican Party in town. I said, gather all your people together. And she goes, what? And I said, yeah. I'm on the Chamber of Commerce. I got to welcome you in town for your grand opening. And she goes, So all these people show up around me and they're in their cowboy hats, cowboy boots, and some of them had guns on their side. And I'm like, this is going to be fun. So I welcomed the Republican Party into the county, knowing darn well they didn't like who I was, but they couldn't do anything about it.
Overall, how was the reception? How did they treat you? And then I want you to talk about your new organization. I think a lot of people have a perception that if a person votes in a particular way, that they have particular opinions or they have particular beliefs. And I know, living here in Florida, I'm surrounded by people who are conservative, mostly libertarian, who probably do vote primarily Republican. And I got to tell you, they're some of the nicest people I've ever met. And they're very kind and they're respectful towards me. And a lot of them know that I'm trans. hands, and they don't seem to give 2 seconds of thought to it. They just don't. And I try to tell that to people, but I don't think they buy it. And by the way, a lot of these are gay and lesbian people. So I think that shocks people that there are gay and lesbian people that are quite fiscally conservative and socially liberal, but they're still libertarians or Republicans.
That's right.
Yeah.
I found the same thing too, Zander, is that people are people. They're good people. Most people are good anyway. Let me put it like that. Most people are good. 99.5% of the people that you run into are basically decent human beings. That's what they want to be. And that's fine. And that's good. That's what happens. And that's what I discovered too there in Warrensburg, Missouri, is that only a handful of people would object to me strongly. And I can get, whenever I did my name change and all that stuff, it was there in Johnson County. And I go before the judge for my name and gender change and all that kind of stuff to get the documentation. He said, so, you're going to have to run this in the newspaper for like 2 weeks. Bring back in the receipt to show that you've done all of that. And I said, Judge, how many times have you seen me on the front page of the newspaper here lately? He goes, yeah, I think we'll just go ahead and waive that. Because whenever I came out and went public there, I'm the kind of person who likes to be very proactive. I get ahead of something. So I called the local newspaper editor, who was a friend, and told him the story. And I brought him out to the restaurant. He took some pictures, all this kind of stuff, one of the restaurants, and ran me in the newspaper. I was thinking page 19, maybe back in the family section. No. Half of the front page. Local restaurateur transitioning.
Wow. Was it above the fold or below the fold?
Above the fold.
Wow.
Top of the page. Yeah. So somebody wrote into the letter to the editor later. About 2 weeks later, it shows up in print. And this person said, I'm so-and-so from down in Leighton, Missouri. And I'll give you an idea of what Leighton, Missouri is like. If you ever saw Hee Haw, the old show from a long time ago, population 200, just hold a sign up in Cornfield, Leighton. Okay. There you go. This person said, no, we don't believe in that kind of, this is me putting their accent on it. I can do this. We don't believe in that kind of stuff around here. Besides, that's just a senior citizen in a training bra. And I go,
it is kind of funny.
It is funny. I have fun with it. I mean, everybody else thought I should be offended at it, but I wasn't offended at that.
But that's key right there, Cassie, is we have choices we can make. Are we going to be offended, or are we just going to go, well, that's actually funny? And, is it making fun of me? Yeah. Can I laugh at it? I find that more people get more upset about things that might be trans related. They get more upset about it than most of the trans people I know.
Right.
Do you find that? It's kind of interesting. And then I want us to be sure and talk about this new organization, because I don't want us to end the show without people hearing about that. Okay. But I appreciate all of this information that you've shared with us. Really wonderful information about you and your journey and your family and the work that you've done. I mean, just in government, right? With service to the military and also in city council, chamber of commerce, owning so many different kinds of businesses, from employment temp agencies to construction companies and restaurants. I mean, kudos to you. People say, Zander, you do so much. You're so busy. Well, I can now say to them, I'm not as busy as Cassandra.
That's a coping mechanism, but it's also something you've got to, if you're passionate about something. I was telling my psychologist this morning about this very same thing, that if you're passionate about something, he was asking me about who am I and what are the things that define me? And I said, well, the things that define me can't be separated from the things that I do. They're one and the same. I do this work for transgender veterans and gender minority veterans and people in this community because that's what I'm passionate about. And because that's who I am too. There's no other way to look at it for me, because who I am and what I do are connected. Everything about it's tied together. They're one and the same to me.
Right. So, if you think about like doing in construction, employment, restaurants, well, that says to me that you had an investment in the communities that you lived in. Right. You served in city council. You wanted people to have places to come and congregate over good food. You wanted to create a space where people could get work. You wanted to create new homes or new businesses or new industries, right? So it's the same kind of passion or motivation. It just plays out in so many different ways.
It sure does. It really does. One of the things that I'll get into the story of the organization and how we got to this new organization in just a second. But one of the things I was involved in also in Johnson County was on the city council, they had a statute that said you could create a human relations council there. And that thing had been on there since 1973 in their statutes in 73. They had never seated that council. They had never seated that commission. Working with the city government and the city administrators, we got that thing stood up. And they said, so you can go ahead and bring in as many people you want to be on the committee to sit on this and form it. You get it stood up. It's, you make it run. You brought it to us. You make it run. So they authorized it. And I said, okay, here's the people I want on there. I want the local imam from the Islamic Center. I want the local Baptist preacher. I want all these other people. And I said, why do you want those? They don't always agree with you. I said, that's why I want them there, because they're people first. And one thing is I like to know who, I want everybody to be engaged, because if you're engaged in something, if you're a part of it, then you can't say that you don't know about it. But anyways, that's what we did. So back to the organization now. So first thing was back October of 21, some people from Transgender American Veterans Association, some of the leaders, Ann Murdoch at the time and Angela Brightfeather, reached out to me and said, hey, come on, join the board. We'd like to have you on the board. Because I jumped in on a conversation one time and they said, we need her on the board. So they brought me on the board and they said, we'd like for you to take up the VA engagement side of things for us first. Well, they didn't realize what they got a hold of.
That's right, because you're going to do it big. Your VA engagement, I can't wait for you to tell people about it. It's extraordinary.
Before we go on, let's take our second commercial break. We'll be back shortly.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Let's pick up where we left off with Cassandra Williamson.
So first thing we did was we started building out some surveys. IRB, Institutional Review Board approved surveys in conjunction with the University of Alabama. We got that thing rolling up. We brought people in. I started getting engagement from all these people who were really fascinated about doing this. They wanted to get involved in things and they had something to do. I gave them something to do. And so they loved it. And all of these people who weren't on the board or just members of the organization. I mean, starting in October, it stood off with a wildfire. We lit a wildfire. And this thing just took off. We got the survey out in January of the next year of 2022. And that was when I began to realize that one of the things that was missing, the pandemic had been going on and people were losing connection and contact with each other and really needed to feel seen and heard, literally seen and heard. So I did a test run. I decided to go from Alabama down to Florida to see if I could use I'd retired September 21. And so I go to Florida, stay with a couple of veterans on the way down through there. I get to see people down from Tampa to Orlando to Gainesville, Lake City, all these places over in Florida, our veterans and our veteran care coordinators at the VA, the Veterans Administration facilities. So I saw a lot of people and I realized I could do it. But that was just a small test. So I go back home and about a week or two, about 2 weeks later or something like that, I decide that I'm going to take this thing on the road and go up the East Coast. I had to be in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in March. So I figured I'd just take off and just go on up the coast, just visiting people. So I charted out my routing completely. I started in Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, went up to DC, went that way, went all the way into Maine. And that was the first test. And so big test. And that proved to me that I could do it physically. And that wasn't mentally taxing for me. So I go out and all I'm doing is just by myself. I'm in my little yellow Fiat car and I'm just driving. On the back of it, by the way, it had a bumper sticker that said transgender veteran, woman, Navy and Marine Corps and US Naval Academy. Got more photos of that darn car. I don't know where they're at now, but I'm sure they're all over the internet somewhere. But so I traveled all up and down the East Coast. I visited VA medical facilities, the major ones, and met leaders everywhere there, met veterans everywhere there. Come back, then I take it to the West. And I visited all the lower 48 states, all 48 of the U.S. Lower 48 states, and about 85 to 90% of all the major VA medical facilities in the nation. And if you know anything about the U.S. Veterans Administration and how it runs, if you walk into a VA and you ask someone, what's the one thing you can tell me about this VA? And they go, well, when you've been in one VA, you've been in exactly one VA because they're all different. I learned after traveling the nation, and by the time I got to the West Coast, I'd figured this out, that that's not entirely true. There are two major things in which they're the same. One of them is that they all have flagpoles in front. The second thing is breakfast is the same across the country at VA facilities. So by the time I got to Reno, Nevada, talking to the senior leadership of the facility there, I told them, I said, look, now, if y'all really want to know how to get all of our policies implemented correctly across the VA, if you really want to know how to do that, because we got a lot of policies like trans care one and LGBT care ones and stuff like that inside VA that is responsible for how we are to be cared for. Now, so if you want to know how to do all that, you need to go to the veteran canteen service and ask them how they get breakfast the same across the country, because they've got it down. And I said, with one exception to Iron Mountain, Michigan, which is way up there above Wisconsin, up on that way up there just by itself, right up there, right across the border. At that VA, they had scones for breakfast. And that was like chocolate and vanilla and plain scones. And that's the big difference. That was a huge difference. And then at Iron Mountain, who was in charge at the time, Zachary Sage, interim director, he told me, he said, now you're going to have to go out in the town. You got to go out in the town and try these things called a pasty. And I said, Zachary, I have a different perception of what pasty means. He said, well, the miners did this thing. They would wrap all their food up in a bread thing and dough and put it on their stoves in the iron ore mines. That's how they would fix their breakfast or their lunch or dinner, and it became a pasty. And I'm thinking, okay. So those are the big differences. Been a learning experience across the country. Now back to the organization within TAVA. TAVA made a lot of that happen too. I put an enormous amount in it. I lost my car along the way in a crash. Put a lot into it. They did a lot of it. They put a lot into it. So I'm very thankful for all of that kind of thing, because that's what made it all happen. The thing I learned though was that the veterans really did miss meeting people and seeing people. Met one veteran out in Arkansas who told me she had never met another trans veteran ever.
Wow.
Other people in the town who were trans and all that kind of stuff, but she had never met a trans veteran. The first thing she was on a Saturday evening. First thing she did was give me this huge bear hug that I could barely breathe in. And just squeezed. And she said, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. Oh my gosh. And I'm going, wow. Okay. And then she said, would you go to the club with me tonight? We need to go to the club. Well, I've got to be in Dallas in the morning, but I saw her face. And so I went to the club with her that night. And I'm going to tell you, that happened everywhere across the country. The veterans were so happy to see another veteran, and particularly a leader from one of the organizations that they were involved in. That's the thing that set apart what we were doing. It put a face to the organization. It made it real, and it started bringing in people and made things grow and happen. So whenever I ended up leaving TAVA in March, I think it was first part of March of this year, 2022, a lot of things were in place. A lot of things were rolling along. I had no intention of going back and doing it. But as I said before, this is a passion that you just can't get rid of that easily. It's who you are. But people kept asking me, from senior leaders in the VA, from veterans I'd met all across the country. They said, we need you to do something. So what I did with the new organization, I thought about it. And then I think it was Dr. Koth asked me, he said, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, doctor, I've been pushed and prodded by people who are familiar with me to go do something. And he said, well, I didn't expect less. But I started it out with this concept that we were going to build this thing from the ground up. And that's the whole premise behind it, built with veteran input from the moment it started. I turned the whole concept of a nonprofit upside down. Most nonprofits start with a core group of people who have an idea, and then they start building it out from there. Well, I knew I had an idea for it, but I also knew that I might not have the best idea, or at least the most complete idea. So I needed other people to help. And I wanted to give a voice to all those people I had met and people I had never met, who are veterans or in this community, gender minority people. And within a month, there were 200 people who had signed up to be part of this to start it. Within a month, they became that core group, and they all met. They organized this. They organized the whole darn thing. They had conversations about bylaws, about vision, about mission, about all this kind of stuff. They created this thing. And then the other part of it was I knew also that a lot of it hinged on my personality and my character and whatever. The people were just drawn to that. I know that. I get it. But I didn't want to be the leader of the organization either, because I thought that would be defeating the purpose down the road. That would be a hindrance rather than a positive. And I told them, I said, one thing is, if this thing is not representative of our communities, and I mean representative of our communities across the board, if there's not representation by people who are trans and Black or Indigenous, trans, then it wouldn't succeed. Just like I had done with the Human Relations Council in Warrensburg, I wanted to make sure there were people in here who could speak for themselves. I couldn't speak for them. So I made a point of making sure that people were brought in. And we had elections for president, vice president, all these kind of things. And person of color is at the top. That's what I wanted. They won the election handily. And the other surprising part of it is also one of the co-founder of TAVA, Transgender American Veterans Association, is also now the chair of our advocacy side. And we have 2 corporations formed. We've got one in New York that is the charity helping side, one here in Alabama that is our advocacy side, and Angela Brightfeather is the chair of that side. She won that handily too. And we've got representation across the board. We've got doctors on our board of directors. Our vice president is a doctor of psychology. So we've got really experienced people. Dr. Maurice Garcia from out in California, Cedars-Sinai, he's on our board, our main board, TDVA board.
Well, that's fantastic. A lot of people don't know that there are people that aren't part of the trans community, but again, I mentioned it earlier, who falls under this umbrella, which are these providers, these clinicians. Dr. Maurice Garcia, I met him, oh gosh, it's probably been 15 years now, when he was a VA doctor in San Francisco, and I went to go see him. And so he's been involved in the VA with his team there at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. When I was working with the transgender care team, we sent sailors and Marines. I don't think we sent any coasties there, but we sent sailors and Marines who were seeking surgeries that weren't being performed on military bases, because the military bases were able to do breast augmentation and chest reconstruction for the trans men, hysterectomy, orchiectomy, facial feminization. They were able to do all those surgeries, but we sent people out for what was called like genital reconstruction surgeries or bottom surgeries, phalloplasty, metoidioplasty, vaginoplasty, vulvoplasty. We sent them out through TRICARE with a waiver, and Cedars-Sinai and Dr. Garcia's team was one of the places that we sent people. So he's pretty instrumental, not only on the VA side, but also the military side when it comes to performing these surgeries. Cassandra, what is the name of this organization and what's your web address?
The name of it is Transgender and Diverse Veterans of America. Shorten it down to TDVA, and that's the C3 side, that side of it. The advocacy side is Transgender and Diverse Veterans of America Action Group. That allows us to do that. The website is www.tdva-ag.org, and on there you'll find all the information you should find on a website, everything you need to know, including more probably.
So this is for veterans who are trans, gender diverse, meaning non-binary, pan-gendered, all the various. There's so many different gender identity terms that are being used now, but also for people who are allies, partners, right, family members, providers in the community can get involved. If they have a mission to want to serve veterans, this is one way that they can apply that interest. Yeah,
absolutely is. And yeah, it's just an amazing thing to watch this grow. We've got 370 registered members on our Facebook group. I think there's about almost 2,800 people there. We're really moving along. Got a lot going on. There are 23 committees out there right now that are stood up and doing all kinds of things. One of them, by the way, is a veteran service officer training and certification program. And the people doing that are VA employees who do this.
That's fantastic. I'm not sure if you know, I went through the Rainbow Shield training program that the Modern Military Association of America put together. I did it probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's a training for veteran service officers that are in like the state veterans departments, right? Because a lot of people don't know there's a federal agency or department, cabinet level, called Veterans Affairs. And then each state, like here in Florida, it's Florida Department of Veterans Affairs. In California, they call it CalVet. And those people that work for those agencies who help veterans one-on-one get their benefits, apply for student benefits, home loan benefits, they're called veteran service officers. I don't know if Rainbow Shield is actually still up and running, but if they are, you might want to talk to them, because I know that they were thinking about doing a specific training that was kind of clinical, like a behavioral health kind of version of the VSO training. I was going to tap to be involved in, made the development of that, but I'm not sure it was ever developed.
That's a great program. I'll have to check that out. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do want to give a big shout out to Michael Christine Hochberg again, because a lot of the connections that I've made across the country, particularly at the clinical side and all that, would not have taken place if I had not met Michael Hochberg in Atlanta last year. Ever since then, it's been one call after another every day. We've been working on a lot of stuff, and I just have to give big kudos and big shout out to Michael Hochberg for that, and appreciative of that and the connections that we've made and the friendships that we've developed.
For anybody who wants to get connected with anybody across the country that has anything to do with trans conferences, events, people, the history of our community, Michael Hochberg, also goes by Christine, is definitely a person to know if that's your interest, because you will be forever flooded with names and numbers and information about these individuals and these events and this history, which is quite vast. And it's wonderful that we have historians in our community. I know we have archives. Michael Christine has an archive in their brain.
They do. And they can repeat it verbatim at the drop of a hat. 40 years. They've been into it for 40 years. Anyway, so I just want to thank you two for letting me be here today and inviting me on. Zander, thank you. Thank you so much.
It's been an honor and a joy to have you on the show today.
Just wonderful energy.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for all the work that you've done, all the work that you're doing, and for all the work that you're going to be doing. I just know it's going to be great. I'm glad that we're friends and I'll get to hear about it along the way. I'm really looking forward to our listeners being able to hear about you and your work. And so again, it's the Transgender and Diverse Veterans of America, TDVA-AG.org. And you've mentioned TAVA a few times, Transgender American Veterans Association. Our website is transveteran.org.
Thank you so much. It's just such an honor and privilege to be here. So
we have come to the end of our show. We hope you join us next time on The Umbrella Hour with Dr. On and Zander Keig. See you next time.